Hello, I'm Bill Turner, sitting out here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Yep, I'm in Oklahoma. I was born in Oklahoma City. I've lived in 5 other states. I'm not a modaloki by any stretch of the imagination. I have a PhD in U.S. history from Vanderbilt University, and I have a JD from the University of Wisconsin, and which having both a PhD and a JD already puts me in a tiny minority of the population by any definition at all, but certainly especially in Oklahoma. But I'm an Okie. I was born, bred, and fed. All my great grandparents lived in Oklahoma. My grandparents all grew up in Oklahoma. My parents grew up in Oklahoma. My parents did both go to college. My father went to the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School. He was finished before Donald Trump was there, so he didn't have to interact with Donald Trump while he was at the University of Pennsylvania happily. Nobody ever wants to have to interact with Donald Trump unless it's absolutely necessary. Kind of scary thought. But anyway, so apparently ranting and raving on video is something people do these days in the United States, and it's easy to do, and it's kind of fun. So I figured I'd give it the old college try. The thing I want to rant and rave about very particularly is the fact that it does, as long as you can be as just as dumb as a post and have a platform in the United States, as long as you say you're conservative. Begs the question what it is to mean, what it means to be conservative in the United States, because the conservatism as a political philosophy has a long-standing and well-established and fairly distinguished intellectual history in the West. And we're talking in the Western culture, because Eastern culture is a whole different, that's all different kettle of fish. But in Western culture, there are in fact reasonably intelligent, respectable intellectuals who have denominated themselves conservative and articulated a consistent philosophy called conservatism. Being conservative is really kind of dumb in general because conservatism suggests a resistance to change. Now, the leading sort of in the 20th century anyway, sort of notional conservative in the United States was a guy named William F. Buckley, whom a lot of people have heard of. William F. Buckley. He's fairly famous. He appeared on television a fair amount, and he, of course, started the National Review, which is a leading journal of conservative opinion in the United States. And he famously described himself as a man standing athwart history yelling stop, which is the most preposterous thing on the planet. You've got to be kidding me. You can't stand athwart history, which but it gives you an interesting indication of the basic problem with being conservative in the United States these days. Is that a lot of conservative, basically the default conservative in the United States these days is presumptively heterosexual, white man who has an egregiously, grotesquely overdeveloped sense of his self-worth. So Donald Trump is a motor conservative in the United States these days, and Donald Trump is the apotheosis of the problem I'm talking about. So Donald Trump was never, the first time I became aware of Donald Trump was in the 90s, when he was still just basically a businessman before he was even on The Apprentice. And I can't even remember how I became aware of his existence. But I looked at him and I thought, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. Sir, you're supposedly a billionaire and you wear your hair that way? My God, man, get a real haircut. If not, just stop. Obviously, a charlatan and what my father would call a high roller, a guy who wants to try to impress everybody with how much money he has. You know, I'm generally not impressed with high rollers. I mean, pardon me, anybody should be impressed with high rollers because that's what they're trying to do. They're deliberately trying to impress you. And if you have to work really hard to impress me, then I'm not impressed. And I'm definitely not impressed with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has had, before he became president of the United States, before he ran for president of the United States, he had zero experience in public office at all. He just never served in public office, in a discussion, full stop, of any sort. He'd been, supposedly a hugely successful businessman, although we're not even really sure about that because he won't list his tax returns. And then he became the star of a reality TV show, which, I mean, reality TV is just the dumbest thing on the planet. You've got to be kidding me. There's absolutely nothing real about having somebody follow you around with a TV camera all over the place. Well, on the Kardashian model or on the Donald Trump model or whatever model you want to use. Nothing on television is really, really real in that sense anyway. So, oh, it's The Apprentice. Oh, you're fired and all this coverage. I've never actually seen an episode of The Apprentice. I don't care to. But so Donald Trump decided he wanted to run for president. He obviously had to run for president as a Republican, which is the conservative party in the United States, the so-called conservative party in the United States. Because obviously he knew perfectly well that only conservatives would be dumb enough to vote for him. There's no way he could run as a Democrat for president because Democrats are too smart to vote for people as somebody as dumb as Donald Trump. Donald Trump is crazy and dumb as a post, and he never deserve to be president. Should never got anywhere near the presidency. It's embarrassing that it's an embarrassment to the Republic and to the Constitution that he was. I mean, he got really, really super duper extra lucky. It's just really extraordinary. Only he and George W. Bush are really sort of the only people in the United States ever who's really totally, genuinely lost the popular vote and then managed to get into the presidency solely via the electoral college. John Quincy Adams, of course, lost the popular vote, or didn't win the popular vote anyway. But he got it. But the electoral college stymied over John Quincy Adams, and it ended up being the House of Representatives that handed the presidency to John Quincy Adams. It really doesn't happen very often at all that somebody loses the popular vote and then wins the presidency through the electoral college. It just doesn't happen very often. And so Donald Trump got really, really extremely lucky, and it's no great surprise that he lost in 2020. And if he runs in 2024, basically the same thing's going to happen. Because right now, white people are sharply divided in the United States between the smart people and the dumb people who vote for Donald Trump. And only dumb people will vote for Donald Trump. And only in my, so only about, it's about maybe 60-40 dumb people and smart people, 50-50 somewhere in there. But anyway, so the point is there aren't enough dumb people by themselves to elect Donald Trump president of the United States. He lost the popular vote in 2016. He lost the popular vote badly, even worse in 2020. Actually, in 2016, Donald Trump lost the popular vote by roughly the same number of votes as George W. Bush won the popular vote in 2004. So, I mean, the idea that Donald Trump basically lost both elections. He just got really, really lucky in 2016 and happened to have his losing popular vote scatter around the country in a way that managed to get him to pass the electoral college. He got really lucky. So anyway, with white people sharply divided between the dumb people who vote for Donald Trump and the smart people who vote for anybody other than Donald Trump, doesn't matter. I mean, I don't care who it is. So pick a name out of the phone book. Anyway, and there's the dumb people who vote for Donald Trump and the smart people who vote for whoever else. Then that leaves let's all the other the sort of non-white people like that really matters. Anyway, so the black people, the brown people, the feminists, the people who realize that no woman ever want to vote for Donald Trump. Ugh, that's really gross. And Jewish people, Donald Trump has recently, talking about how, God, why don't Jewish people like me? Because you're an idiot. And Jewish people are, too smart to vote for you. I mean, and I mean, okay, they're like maybe times as small, like maybe a quarter of Jewish people vote for him. Anyway, and of course he's also, he wins the Christian vote, hands down. And, Jews are perfectly happy to get along with Christians, but Christians usually don't get along with Jews. Picking on Jews has been a consistent pattern of Christians ever since, as long as Christianity existed. So it's a bad habit they picked up from the Romans before Christianity existed. And of course, the apotheosis of Christians picking on the Jews was the Holocaust. And you'd think that supposedly we learned a moral lesson from the Holocaust, but a lot of good Christians in the United States apparently didn't learn that lesson because now they're busy being Christian nationalists, which is really dumb. And what really cracks me about Christian nationalists is all these good floppy liberal Christians. Oh, you can't be a Christian nationalist. Honey, please just stop. The only reason there's any nationalism in what we call the Americas at all is because of the fact Christians came over. There's no, I can't, if somebody out there can show me, point me some evidence that any Native American culture in the pre-Columbian Native American culture, that pre-Columbian meaning Native American culture before Columbus showed up and started raping, pillaging, enslaving, and murdering people, had any concept of nation state. They certainly were organized into different ethnic, what we call tribes. Now, who knows? We don't really understand exactly how they understood themselves because Christians were too busy killing them to bother to find out what they thought about themselves very clearly. But they clearly are organized into tribes. And I live in Oklahoma, as I say, and there are a number of recognized Native American tribes that are very, and they have their own organization. They've adapted to Western, the force of the Christian invasion to the point where they have their own basically sort of westernized political structures, and the chief tribe, the chief tribe of the Cherokee Nation here in Oklahoma is a very fairly prominent political leader. He's an interesting guy. He speaks up about how stupid the Republican governor in Oklahoma is, and the Republican governor in Oklahoma is an idiot, undoubtedly, because he's a Republican and he's a good Christian Republican. But the point is, Native Americans did not understand themselves in terms of nation states. They understood themselves in tribes, but a tribe is not a nation state. They're two different things. The nation state is a distinctively European Christian concept. And so the only reason we have nationalism at all in the Americas is because Christians brought nationalism with them. All of the borders that make up nation states in the Americas exist because of the Christian invasion, right? Because, for example, this whole business of build the wall, right? The border between what we call the United States and what we call Mexico. The only reason there's a border there at all is because of the Christian invasion. There, before Christians came, Native Americans lived in that hope. They still do. Obviously they lived in they populated that entire area, all of the area that we think of as the U.S. Mexican border. But they went back and forth, and they didn't. There was no border there. There was no. The tribal boundaries probably overlapped what we call the border because the border between the United States and Mexico is a Christian invention. All nationalism in the in the Americas is Christian nationalism. There's no other kind. I mean, you just can't. It just makes zero sense to say, Christianity is not consistent with nationalism. Nationalism is not consistent with Christianity. That's a silly concept. The nation state originated in Europe, in Christian Europe, and there would be no nationalism at all in the Americas if it weren't for the Christian invasion. So anyway, that's what that. But anyway, so Donald Trump, like but we were talking about Jews, Jews. There probably been Jews. There weren't any Jews before the Christian invasion either, but the Jews tagged along with the Christians when the Christians invaded. Anyway, so Donald Trump is mad about why does Jews don't support me? Well, because you're an idiot, and because because you're dumb and supposed to, you don't deserve the support of Jews. But anyway, or so Jews historically have voted Democratic pretty consistently. And of course, a lot of the Jews in the United States came over, especially from Germany, and they brought with them, like most Germans who could move to the United States, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, they brought with them a basic sort of socialist traditions. I lived in Milwaukee in the early 2000s, and when I moved to Milwaukee, it was still the case. It was the case that the last person who was elected as a socialist mayor of Milwaukee was still alive then. I didn't actually get to meet him or anything, but anyway, so in the heavily Germanic culture of Wisconsin, they have they basically had genuine serious socialist traditions up there. So but anyway, so it's no surprise that they don't like Republicans because Republicans, socialism is bad. Well, that's a separate subject. But anyway, so the problem here again, the biggest problem, the broad problem that I'm trying to address here is the fact that you can be just as dumb as a post and have a platform and get other people to follow you around and listen to what you're saying if you just call yourself a conservative. And William F. Buckley again, I'm a man standing athwart history yelling stop, which is really self-aggrandizing and stupid. You can yell stop all you want to at history. You can't stop things from changing. The only consistent aspect of human existence is change. That's just all. I mean, just show me something that doesn't change and that human beings can perceive, and we'll talk about it. I mean, the Earth itself changes all the time. We're changing the Earth ourselves in some scary ways, but that's all a separate subject. But anyway, so conservatives are absurdly, Donald Trump again is a modal conservative, absurdly self-aggrandizing. Everything has to be all about Donald Trump. He's just recently, now he's mad about the fact that this ridiculous special investigation under Special Prosecutor Durham has just had its most recent disaster in court where it failed to get a conviction against another defendant for supposedly messing about with the FBI investigation of Donald Trump and his Russian collusion during the 2016 campaign and continuing throughout his presidency. And Donald Trump's, oh, well, that's a Clinton appointed judge, which actually, in principle should not matter. These days we pay a lot of attention to who appoints federal judges, but, as even Donald Trump has found out, much to his chagrin, plenty of Trump appointed judges have taken positions that are contrary to what Donald Trump presumably wants. Now, too many of them are doing what Donald Trump does want, and this whole business of this mess of what's going on with that judge in Judge Cannon down in Florida, who agreed to take on the case that she should not have taken on when he sued to get the documents that he stole from the federal government back that he doesn't have any right, he doesn't have any claim to. That whole thing, now she's just a Trump toady and she's an embarrassment to herself and the federal judiciary, but she's an exception. There are plenty of other Trump appointed judges who have also then not done, like 60 different lawsuits to try to reverse the 2020 election. He lost every one of them, and some of them he lost to Trump judges. So anyway, Donald Trump is a modal conservative. He's an exemplary conservative in the United States. He's dumb as opposed. He's crazy. He's incredibly self-aggrandizing, but he got a platform because he's conservative, which is really it's pathetic. It's really sad. It's a deeply, deeply sad thing about our culture that we're willing to do this. But Donald Trump is certainly not the only one. Donald Trump is one of many, many, many. Rush Limbaugh, of course, is dead now, mercifully so. But Rush Limbaugh is another good example of a visibly self-aggrandizing, dumb as opposed person who managed to. Or Alex Jones. Take Alex Jones. Alex Jones is, I guess, again, but kind of again goes back to the question of what it means to be conservative, right? So again, there is, in fact, a respectable intellectual tradition in Western culture of being conservative. And then there are these idiots in the United States who call themselves conservative who are not the sort of conservative. I mean, Alex Jones ends up on what's called conservative side of the equation. I don't. It's hard to understand what Alex Jones. It's kind of hard to assign Alex Jones to an ideological category at all because Alex Jones is just completely off the rails, crazy, dumb as a post. And recently, a lot of people are amazed at the fact that a jury just recently assigned came to slapped him almost $1 billion in damages in the case of several people who sued him because of the horrible things that he said about them and their families as a result of the mass shooting up in Connecticut that killed all those children. That horrible incident that very sad, and that Alex Jones decided to make a lot of money off of by being taking the conservative position. Oh, those people are crisis actors, saying all those horrible things, just really horrible things about those people, and they are finally getting at least as much justice as you can get when somebody says something like that horrible about you. But anyway, so, but Alex Jones is another good example of, just off the chart crazy person. But there are many others. Joe Rogan is another good example. Joe Rogan is just, please. I mean, just dumb as opposed and crazy, but because he's conservative, he gets a platform and he makes huge amounts of money off of his podcast or what. I mean, is that a podcast? I don't even know. I don't really care. I don't listen to podcasts either. But he has a huge platform and lots of people listen to him, and I don't know why. But so anyway, there are lots and lots of these people out there. Ben Shapiro is another good example. Ben Shapiro, not too long ago, and I spent a lot of time on Twitter and see a lot of things. But he issued a tweet recently that really kind of cracked me up. So he wanted to take on the entire Enlightenment, right? So the Enlightenment is a period that began, let's say, roughly in the beginning of the 18th century. Um, that historical period where and that had a very important impact on the history of the United States because it was as a result of the kind of proto Enlightenment. The the philosopher John Locke, who's famous if you're reading John Locke in college, you usually read his essay Concerning Human Understanding, which basically sort of articulates the notion of empiricism, the idea that the best way that human beings can get knowledge about the world around them is through the five senses, and that we use empirical. And you do this. People have been doing this, since as long as human beings have existed. But as John Locke in the 17th century said, here's what you're doing. And empiricism, according to some people, is self-defeating but anyway, whether it's self-defeating or not, in practice it really works quite well. And empiricism is the basic principle that underlies all scientific research. All scientific research is basically empirical in some sense. But the important thing that John Locke did that had a huge impact on the United States, locking the culture of colonial the colonial in the colonial period of United States history from the 1607 when Jamestown, the first successful English colony in Jamestown, got established, up through 1789 with the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, um, was thoroughly imbued with Lockean ideas, just all the way start to finish. Well, okay, starting 17th, 18th century, because obviously Locke didn't publish until 16, didn't publish the Second Treatise of Government until 1689, so he got away until the Glorious Revolution in English 1689. But from that point forward, and obviously, John Locke, Thomas Jefferson basically plagiarized the basic ideas of the Declaration of Independence from John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, and we don't call it plagiarism because it's borrowing, and it's it was. If it were an academic exercise, it would be plagiarism, but it's not because it's if it was part. He was fomenting a revolution, and it was a successful revolution. So if you succeed, you get away with it. But anyway, the idea that that we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, all men and women are created equal. We should put women in there. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Jefferson changed it. According to Locke, the three natural rights are life, liberty, and property. According to John Locke, all human beings are equal, and all human beings have the natural rights of life, liberty, and property. And government exists only because human beings need to have a practical mechanism to help defend their natural rights. What John Locke had theorized the state of nature, where people didn't have government, and they still had the same natural rights in the state of nature. But the problem is, in the state of nature, without some mechanism to defend your rights, they're extremely fragile. And so you have a right to property. So you go out and gather up all your berries and take them back to your hut or wherever it is you live, and you have an ample supply of berries, but then you're stuck either having to sit around and guard your berries all the time because you're afraid somebody else will come along and steal them, or somebody else will come along and try to kill you, or something, life, liberty, and property, try to deprive you of your life, your liberty, or your property, and so you're stuck. So what we do is, then he said, this is all theoretical, he didn't really believe this actually happened, but although he kind of was fascinated with Native Americans, thought maybe Native Americans lived in the same nature, they didn't, but that's, anyway. Um, yeah, people get together and agree to create a government. And a government, basically, what a government does is a government puts everybody puts some of their berries into the pot, and then you divvy up you distribute some of those berries to people who are conservatives, police officers and judges, and other and government officials, and allow some people take on the role of providing government for the rest of the society. as a way of making sure that people, as a way to increase the enforcement of people's natural rights, to increase the reliability, but make an enforcement mechanism so that your rights to life, liberty, and property are much more effectively ensured under government than in the state of nature. So this is the basic concept that Thomas Jefferson was operating under in the Declaration of Independence, the idea that we all have the right. Now, say Locke said life, liberty, and property. Jefferson said life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for whatever reason. We have a very Lockean government to start off with, and Locke also. The other thing is in terms of like conservative and liberal being the only two options that we can think of, most people can think of in terms of political ideologies in the United States that completely obliterates, being a libertarian, being a socialist, being a communitarian, being a communist, being. There are lots of other options out there that are theoretically available, but in the United States we only have liberal and conservative. And that division of the world into liberal and conservatives dates from the Glorious Revolution in English, when in England, when the English decided they would not have a Catholic king in James II. So they chased James II off the throne. They would have killed him but he got away. And like they did Charles the Why they named why was his name Charles? King Charles I. They managed to slice his own shit. That's all some subject. Anyway, so back to the Enlightenment. So Locke sort of in some ways kind of helped spark the Enlightenment with his discovery of empiricism, his articulation of what we didn't call it that, but what we now call liberalism as a political philosophy comes out of John Locke. And it is the basic political policy that informs the government of the United States. The United States Constitution is a distinctively liberal document. It's a hugely liberal document. A political power comes from the people. The phrase at the beginning of the Constitution, we the people, is not just a clever phrase. It really, really genuinely means that, and this is one of the key ideas that Locke articulated in the Second Treatise of Government, is the idea that, so the conservatives, the people who want to defend King James II in the Glorious Revolution said, well, the king gets his authority directly from God, so you can't argue with God, so you have to shut up and do what the king tells you to do. And Locke was like, oh, that's ridiculous. Political authority does not come from God. Political authority comes from the people as a whole. And so, of course, he's on the side of the people who want to get rid of James II. When James II got chased off and got they substituted with William and Mary. And so um, Locke was pretty happy with the constitutional republic, the constitutional monarchy that emerged as a result of the abdication of James II in favor of William and Mary. But anyway, so this is the beginning of the Enlightenment, and so what Shapiro says, and he kind of gets the Enlightenment more or less right. He says um, the Enlightenment suggests that all morality, no matter how well proved over the course of time, must be rationally explicable. Tabula rasa. Tabula rasa is a Lockean concept. So in the Second Treatise of Government, I'm sorry, in the Essay Concerning Human Understanding, John Locke suggests that children are born as tabula rasa, meaning blank slate. So when you're born, you have no actual substantive knowledge much of anything. You just don't know anything at all because you're here brand new in the world. You don't know, how could you know anything if you're brand new in the world? You have obviously one thing that Locke didn't really fully appreciate was the extent to which human beings are born with an enormous desire to learn. I mean, small children are sponges. They like run around and learn stuff all day, and they learn things that sometimes you go, gotta be careful what you say around small children because they will repeat it. But yeah, that's because they remember things, they hear things, they remember they see things, they remember things because human beings have an enormous capacity to learn and remember what they see and perceive around them. And so you gotta watch out for small children. But anyway, so tabula rasa, and that's a Lockean concept. Must be rationally explicable. Tabula rasa is clearly incorrect and wildly counterproductive. So that is that is. I mean, you got to give Shapiro at least a tiny little bit of credit. He does a post, but anyway, he does at least there genuinely articulate what you could call a genuinely conservative position. So the idea, broadly speaking, you could juxtapose broadly speaking the ideas of conservatism versus the ideas of liberalism, meaning one of the key things being the idea that conservatives like tradition. They like things, they believe the way things used to be and are now is better than the way they're going to become. That human beings cannot deliberately choose to change and improve on society or culture. Which, I mean, whatever. So I mean, the obvious problem that you run into with that, and especially in the United States, is if you're going to take the conservative position, Buckley ran into this problem. William F. Buckley was writing to defend racial segregation in the United States long after all other intelligent people were like, okay, racial segregation sucks, we need to get rid of it. You know, all after white people, because black people always knew racial segregation sucks, and we wanted to get rid of it pretty much from the very beginning, from its very origins. But white people were like, well, you know, it's okay, or it's actually, or as William F. Buckley said, it's a positive good thing. Because William F. Buckley was still taking the position, no, those poor benighted black people, they're not quite ready to participate in self-government yet. So we can't let them vote. We got to segregate. We got to keep the white people separate from the black people. And he was continuing taking this position well into the 50s when all smart white people were like, yeah, I know we really need to stop doing this because it's bad because there's really no incredibly patronizing. No black people capable of participating in self-government. There's absolutely no good reason to segregate the races. But William F. Buckley said, yes, there is. So the problem that you immediately run into with conservative position is conservatism in the United States means defending segregation, ultimately really defending slavery, because in fact, slavery was what existed at the time of the founding of the United States. The United States, in fact, had slavery as a predominant institution in many states, and clearly, the Constitution of the United States clearly accepts the existence of slavery. It doesn't ever use the word slavery. It doesn't talk explicitly about slavery, but it does clearly. Oh, I got a Mike Pence visitor here. Sorry. Uh, um, Slavery there are clearly specific passages where the U.S. Constitution accepts and accommodates the existence of slavery. So if you're going to be a real conservative and say, well, whatever is best, you're stuck with slavery, or even if you can, as some conservative way, make the elimination of slavery in the United States consistent with conservative political philosophy, you're still then end up stuck with say, racial segregation, which I mean, everyone when I think about racial segregation, when I think about again, I live in Oklahoma. Oklahoma had segregation. Oklahoma was not a state at the time of the Civil War, so, but the last Confederate general to stand down after the Confederate surrender at the end of the Civil War was a slave owning Native American who lived in eastern Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, and there is at least one Civil War battlefield, the Battle of Honey Creek in eastern Oklahoma. But anyway, Oklahoma did have, and Oklahoma in many ways is a pretty southern state. But anyway, Oklahoma did have racial segregation. And I think what that means then, in some importance, is I'm supposed to allow the yahoos in the Oklahoma legislature to decide whom I can and can't associate with. I'm supposed to let them tell me that they're going to pass a law that says, I'm sorry, that this is a white restaurant, so you can't bring your black friend in to have lunch with you in the restaurant. Why would I do that? Why would you? But if you're a conservative, yeah, you have to accept that because that's just what exists. And so what and so the thing that Shapiro's upset about is that I mean in terms of I mean segregation is also in my opinion fundamentally irrational. It just doesn't make any. It's just a dumb idea and doesn't make any sense. Seems obvious to me, and I think most people now agree with that. So I mean I would challenge Ben Shapiro if he wants to try to critique Enlightenment rationalism as a basis for morality. He needs to explain to us why it is. How's he going to get rid of it? How's he going to justify getting rid of segregation, slavery, and racial segregation if he's not going to use he doesn't want rationally explicable. And the whole tabula rasa thing is a red herring because, I mean, nobody, I don't think anybody really sees infants and newborn children. I mean, in some sense, not in terms of a sense, Locke is still right in the sense that, when you're born, you don't know the alphabet, you can't speak English, you can't speak any language at all. You can't speak a language. You can't. Essentially you 2-year-olds. You have to keep your eye on 2-year-olds because 2-year-olds just run around in the middle of the street and run about damn near get run over because they don't understand the idea that a car can hit them and run them over. There are a lot of things that small children don't know and need to be taught. Okay, so with tabular, but at the same time, development psychologists, well, I don't think they much care for the idea of the tabula rasa, and why I stuck that in there, I have no idea. But anyway, rationally explicable. Right, rationally. So I mean, I guess maybe what tabula rasa means there is he's trying to say that that you're operating only from the idea of human reason rather than human tradition and custom and all that kind of thing. Well, no human being can ever do that. A human being without culture does not exist. It's impossible to be a human being without culture because you start absorbing culture the minute you're born from the nurse or the midwife or the doctor, assuming it's a nurse or midwife assists your mother in giving birth to you. And any communication you hear from the minute you pop out of the room is language is the basic the vehicle for transmission of human culture, and people talk to each other around infants from the minute you're born, and so you're constantly the minute you're born you start absorbing culture just instantly, and if we didn't have culture, uh, you know, even today in there are human societies where like non-contacted tribes, like that non-contacted tribe in the Andaman Sea where the idiot Christian got killed because he tried to, oh, I'm going to give Jesus to these poor people who give them diseases too. But anyway, I mean that culture has persisted. They don't have hospitals. They don't have they don't have any of the things that we have in the United States or anywhere else in the developed world in terms of. But they still apparently they exist, and so they presumably they are capable of giving birth and raising children. And so, and they have a culture we don't understand very much about it because we leave them alone, which we should leave them alone because otherwise we'll kill them all by giving them diseases they haven't been exposed to, the way that good Christians did when they came to the Americas, um, starting with Columbus. But they have a culture. They must have a culture, and their culture allows them to is how they learn to, how do you give birth and how do you make sure that once you've given birth to a baby that you keep the baby alive. That's culture, and so all human beings have culture to start with. So there's no, the tabula rasa thing. I mean, yeah, it's kind of an interesting heuristic device to think about, conceptualize, try to think about how you do how do you but why we want to eliminate rational considerations from our morality, which apparently, I mean, I guess at the limit if you take conservative philosophy to its extreme and say that we must rely exclusively on tradition and custom and not on any sort of rational calculation at all, inciting our moral principles, why would you want to do that? That's just insane. As I say, that gets you stuck with slavery and segregation, and that gets you stuck with all forms of that gets you stuck with the idea that women should be under the control of their fathers until they get married, in which case they get control of their husbands. All sorts of other customs that existed in the culture of the United States before the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s. Why? But it doesn't make any sense. It's really nonsensical, and we don't do that things that way anymore. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, it makes much more sense not to do them that way. So anyway, and that, but at least you gotta say, give Shapiro a tiny. I mean, he doesn't deserve very much credit because he really is dumb as a post. But anyway, he's another good example of a conservative man who gets a lot of credit and gets a platform, and people pay attention for some. I don't understand why anybody pays attention to Ben Shapiro at all. He might as well Alex Jones, Donald Trump, Rush Limbaugh, all those. Why does anybody pay any attention to these people at all? They're all dumb, supposed and crazy, and they don't deserve any attention from anybody, but they get attention because they're so I'm a conservative. Another good example, as long I mean, so it recently has been bloviating about. So there was this interesting video that showed up of this man doing a really extremely good job of taking bushels, taking baskets of some sort of fruit or vegetable. It's not clear what it is, and hurling them and hurling the basket was such that the fruit that's inside the basket ends up in the back of this truck, and the basket itself falls off to the side of the truck. And doing it really, and the first time I saw it, it was from a labor group saying that the point being that there's no such thing as unskilled labor because this guy's doing what is in some sense, a very basic task of agricultural uh, harvesting some sort of commodity crop, huge quantity, a huge truck full of these things, but he's showing an enormous amount of skill in doing it. And they're like, I couldn't do that. I'm really impressed with the way that man did that. So here comes Ann Coulter, like, well, then it's just assuming this guy's an undocumented immigrant. We don't know. I mean, he could very well be an undocumented immigrant. He might very well be under some specific program that allows him specifically to have official permission to come to the United States in order to do exactly that kind of work. Back in the as an administration, we had the Bracero program, which was kind of a disaster. But anyway, it existed as a specific program to try to allow agricultural workers to come to the United States officially and formally, with recognized as such, in order to do agricultural labor that Americans did already back in the 50s didn't want to do. Brian's culture being resolutely anti-immigrant. She doesn't like immigrants at all. She says, I'm a settler colonialist, not an immigrant. And I'm like, oh, please just stop. My paternal grandmother traced her family all the way back to the Mayflower. I'm a settler colonialist too. It's a ridiculous distinction. We're all immigrants here, honey. Just because you were one of the first people to show up, you were one of the first people to show up and start beating up on Native Americans before everybody else did, does not make you any better than anybody else. That's ridiculous. But anyway, so she wants to stop immigration altogether. So she said she was all gung ho for Donald Trump because he was going to build the wall and stop the immigrants coming from the southern border, and she believed him. I mean, I mean, this is the thing that really just stuns me. Anybody could look at Donald Trump in 2016 and say, "Oh, he's going to build the wall." Really? You really believe you're going to be able to do that? Of course he's not going to be able to do that. That's just ridiculous. So no, but her anti-immigration screed, which she's been on for how many, 6 or 7 years now, and this is one of her consistent themes. So she's looking at this video of this guy doing this amazing, really great job of helping harvest these crops, and it's like, well, why can't it just good grief, a really great thing. She says in a tweet that if we followed the practices of American agriculture, we'd still be sweeping. We wouldn't be using vacuum cleaners. You got to be kidding. You got to be kidding. A set piece of every, when I was taking U.S. history, I taught U.S. history surveys. Every U.S. history survey textbook has a section on in it about how in the 1820s and 1830s, farmers in the United States started using mechanized agriculture. Much more advanced in the North than in the South, because in the South they still had slaves and they didn't need mechanized agriculture because they had slave labor. But anyway, so the point is, in the we mechanization was some of the very first mechanization ever anywhere on the planet was agriculture in the United States. And so we actually and agriculture is a very technologically advanced quadrant of the U.S. economy. But agriculture just sees one guy doing manual labor and say, oh, well, they see these silly farmers, they need to get updated with, and which is an excellent illustration of how completely dumb conservatives are. So people buy agriculture books. I can't imagine why anybody would buy a book by agriculture, but people do, and read, and whether they actually read them or not is an open question. But anyway, so but agriculture is dumb as a post. It just makes zero sense to pay any attention at all to agriculture because she's just as dumb as a post, but she's a conservative, so people pay attention to her. So anyway, I have a book out if you're interested in my ravings on print, which I do better in print. Video's not really my thing, but people like to rave and rant and rave in video, and so I rant and rave in video. My book is called "The GOP Will Not Govern." The GOP will not govern. It's published. It's available online. If you're interested, it explains why it is the Republican Party is now the part is not really even a political party anymore because they're not interested in pursuing policies that are going to benefit the people of the United States. Republicans, like again, Donald Trump's an excellent example, seek high office because they like the perquisites, the prestige, and the opportunities to enrich themselves, which Donald Trump did fulsomely. We found out recently the recent stories about how he charged obscene amounts of money to Secret Service to stay in hotels while he was president, and they have no interest in actually governing. They just want to get rich, basically, and so that's why they're